Boy, I'll tell you, Rudy, you sure bring back memories. But the reason I put some of the things in books obvious are the things that the little vignettes or happenings that happen to me that stand out.
Yeah,
And this is one of them. You want me to tell you the story?
I'd love to because it really, at the end, you make the whole audience disappear. You got to tell us how you did that, though.
Well, what happened, this is one of the busy times of my life. I don't recall exactly. Again, I tried to read it, and it's difficult with a magnifying glass. Anyway, I know I was very busy, and for me, when it's a small audience, it's easier for me,
Mm.
not only mentally. You know what? It boils down to the mental part is easy for me, remembering things. It's the physical part. For example, every audience, it's according to how the audience is situated. I have to run around physically to meet all the people. That really was the hard part. Anyway, I had been very busy, and Renee and I were working together at that time. And as we were flying, I kept saying, "Gee, hon, I hope it's a small audience because I'm tired, man. Physically, mentally, etc." And I kept saying that I hope it's a small audience. We got to it was the Sheraton Hotel in Washington D.C., where I appeared a lot of times. The Sheraton there did a lot of business meeting kind of things, at that particular hotel. Anyway, I worked there quite often. And the way we used to work it, when we arrived at a hotel, I would go up to the room to rest, to grab a nap if I could, etc. And Renee did the other stuff for me. She'd go to the room where we were going to appear, make sure it was set up. She knew what I liked.
Mhm.
Like, I'll give you an example. There were many rooms we'd go to, and she see there was a big dance floor. So here's the stage, then a big dance floor, and then tables. Well, I didn't like that. I don't want this big space, empty space in front of me, the dance floor.
Right.
So she would get somebody to tell her, "Oh, you got to fill up that space with tables." In other words, she would say, "Mr. Lorraine likes the audience close to him," which
Right.
I do. Hey, I got to see faces, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
And I don't like to talk over an empty space. So she would take care of all those things. She would check the sound system and make sure that's working, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Then she came up to the room. I was in bed trying to relax, and she said, "Hon, not to worry. It's a small audience." Okay. So I'm laughing now, thinking ahead, because she said it's a small audience now. Let's jump to where I'm all dressed. I'm ready. I'm in my good suit and shirt and tie, ready to work. And we walk down and we come to the room where I'm going to appear. There's a big sign in front of it, and it says "The Little People of America" in capital letters. That was the name of the group. So that gave me the big laugh of the day, of course, when it was an audience of midgets. I don't know if it still exists. It probably does, but it was called "The Little People of America." And I think you had to be, I'm not sure whether it was 3 feet or 3.5 feet. You had to be that height or under in order to join. So, I mean, these were little people, little people of America. I remember that Billy Barty, who was a pretty well-known actor at the time, was a midget, and he was the president of the club at that time. And we had gotten friendly. We had a couple of dinners together, and etc. Anyway, we walk into the room, and what they had done there, which I guess they had to do, because if these little people sat on regular chairs at the table, they would have to do this in order to eat. In other words, they'd have to reach up for their food. So what they had arranged was tall stools for the little people to sit on so they could eat normally, reach their food, for God's sakes. So there they were. There were 400 people, 400 little people. And I started to walk around, and I think I wrote this in a book. Like I said, I couldn't read the whole article that I had written, but it was one of the first times where I felt tall. I mean, I was 5'6" at the time. I'm a little shorter now. I was 5'6", for God's sakes, and I felt like a giant the whole time I was there with all these little people. And I had mentioned Billy Barty. He was a good actor, and what I remember about him, I think I wrote this in the article, he was a cigar smoker. And I always laughed because I always said the cigar is almost as long as he's tall. Because he smoked these very expensive tall cigars. Anyway, I met all the people. We had a lot of laughs. They all laughed. We had laughs talking about how short I was, things like that. So we had a lot of laughs. Now, jump to the time when Renee is introduced, and then she introduced me, which is the way we always did it. They introduced us as the Marvels of Memory. I think I mentioned this to you. That was first of all, it was a mistake. I changed it eventually, because on our brochure it said Harry, Lorraine, and Renee, the Marvels of Memory. One of the problems was that people thought it was people that booked us thought it was three people: Harry, Lorraine, and Renee. Who thought of these things? And every once in a while, I'm sure I mentioned this to you before, somebody, either the guy made a mistake while he was talking, the guy that introduced us, but every once in a while, somebody would say the Marbles of Memory. And I know I wrote this a few times, so I had to roll out on stage. Come on. We changed it eventually to get rid of these sillinesses. Anyway, Renee introduces me, and I do my intro talk, etc. And here's the point of the whole thing. I said, now with the few people, I'm sure I mentioned this to you, I always said few. This is building up, the point, because I said few, and then the whole audience would stand up, up to 500 or more people. So I said, with the few people I met today who gave me their names, would you please stand up? And I'll tell you, I think about it, my heart stops a little bit. They all stood up and disappeared. They all went under the table. Oh my God, talk about being stunned. Who thought of this? So there was a beat or two of silence. And then a couple of eyes came up above the tabletop, They started to laugh. Renee behind me started to laugh. And we all started to laugh. I mean, who thought of this? We should have, the tables height was taller than these little people. So yeah, we should have thought of that. Sometimes you overlook the obvious,
Good thing they had a great sense of humor, because they could have been taken in an offensive way had they not.
No, we all laughed, and one of the people stuck his eye. I never forgot that, stuck his eyes up out there. And he said, "This is the best trick I ever saw. You made 400 people disappear, for God's sake."